haven't.
I'm well over committed at the moment. But we'll see. We'll see. Good morning. You're back. So are you. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a tough road. Mostly. How you doing? Well, maybe we should mitigate some suspenders. Yeah, tough week. And my wife. She had a horseback riding accident when she was 12 years old. Oh, wow. They had to do something. It's been a weird couple of weeks.
Who did it? Who? Jeremy.
Yeah, from where they blast that part, we have pretty close. I've had it many times.
Who did the surgery?
For Jody Carbajal from UF. He's great. So, all right. Used to be people who came to study.
They didn't know you weren't going to be here. They didn't know you weren't going to be here. Listen.
You have to read the name.
I did. That's why I came.
You're not the ones I'm worried about.
Uh-huh.
Did your brother ever have a kidney stone? No. Father? Strong genetic link. I have one brother, he's had it. I have three sons, two of them have had it.
I saw my kids, you know.
Yeah,
Don't drink soda.
a lot of water.
Soda.
So usually after I have a kidney stone, I don't drink soda for like a week.
Boy, I drink it all the time. All the time. Every meal I have soda.
Diet or regular?
Diet. I don't know, is that better or worse? That's got some
no,
crap in it.
Since I had diabetes, it doesn't. If I take a sip of regular, I'm okay. Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.
Time to conclude the book of Leviticus. The double Torah portion of the Harvest Batai. And in a moment, after all the singing and dancing, will be Leviticus 25.
That was close.
And after there. That's where we'll begin. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 17. So,
Page 947.
947. About 327 in the sacristy.
And 659 stone.
Great. 659 stone. Okay, here we go.
99, excuse me.
B'nai Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat Torah Tolah V'shamru B'nai Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dor Tomari Tolam B'nai Yisrael Oti Le'olam Oti Le'olam V'shamru B'nai Yisrael Et HaShabbat
Asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et hashabat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת. לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. אמן לחיים.
Welcome back, wine.
Okay, Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay. Oh yeah, sure.
Folks, in our very own class here, past President Bill Silver sits right there in the front. Has written an incredible essay that's going to be published in the community newspapers, and I believe it's been sent to the Herald as well. But I don't think they'll be able to publish the whole thing. But I wanted to give you a heads up because I think it's worth reading. It's regarding anti-Semitism. Bill did a great job with ChatGPT, I think.
Yeah.
Regardless, it's wonderful. There's another thing I should mention. This weekend at the Trump National Hotel is a group meeting there called Reawaken America. And the Miami Herald picked up on it yesterday. One of the things that you probably want to know about is that this is a lot of hate talk with this group. And they've had some speakers that were anti-Semites, Holocaust deniers. I looked at the list in the Herald yesterday, and they revised it. The anti-Semite they had was going to speak is not speaking, but the Holocaust denier is speaking, and also he's he's against vaccinations, so it's something to keep your eye on and pay attention to, because this is nothing more than hate speech, and it seems to be getting louder and louder. And we need to all stand up to this. And that's what our task force is about. And so the task force is not relaunched, but we're just now getting our legs underneath us. And we need your help. So if you're interested, we would like you to be a part of that. And all you have to do is reach out. We have plenty of connection points for that. If you look at the website, you'll see them. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Joe. All right. Couple minutes left here for class. No, it's good. Let's get into it. Those are important announcements. The Torah spends a lot of time dealing with interpersonal relationships and the differences between Jew and non-Jew, and Jewish responsibility to look after the ger, to look after the convert, to look after the ger toshav, which is the resident alien, meaning someone who lives in the land of Israel, but who is not Jewish, but who does accept upon him or herself the 7 Noachide laws, so agrees to live not worshiping idols and not eating live animals, and trying not to kill people. Pretty high standards, right? That's a moral person. You don't need an animal. You don't need an animal that's still alive or kill someone or worship idols. If you can find someone like that, that's more moral than the people who'll be gathering at the Doral Golf Club to spread hate for no reason. So then there are, one of the things actually John and I were talking about last night is that, there's this idea that the Jewish people were going to come to the land of Israel And they were afraid to go because there were people living there who were these mighty armies, and so they had the sin of the spies, and they end up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, which is why we're going to have the next book of the Torah, Bamidbar, instead of just going right to Deuteronomy. We weren't supposed to have Bamidbar. It was supposed to be just like, a 12-hour journey, and, you get to customs at the port of Aqaba, and, and you'd come in. But then there was this whole 40-year, no fruit, or nuts, or bugs. And in Israel now, they have these signs on the buses that say no nuts. They don't mean, right, they have pictures of nuts, but they're more afraid of nuts than terrorists. I mean, terrorists, it's like, they don't even care anymore. Well, now they do, but nuts is terrifying to all Israelis. So, and there are a lot of nuts in Israel. I guess I'll be here all week. So they get to Israel, ultimately, and they're there to conquer all the people and kick all the people out. And there's this, for years, centuries, have been blamed for, stealing the land and kicking everyone else out. Those other nations, they never left. We never actually did kick them out. Read through the rest of the Bible. We're fighting with them every week. Constantly fighting. They never, that whole thing, the whole fear of, genocide and kicking all these people out never happened. There were skirmishes and battles, sure. But they never did kick everybody out. Why do you think the Philistines were in Gaza? Right? They still are. Okay, so you have to then have laws that govern how Jews relate to non-Jews. If there were no non-Jews there, you wouldn't need all these laws about how to deal with them in the land of Israel. You would have other laws about foreign policy and stuff, but you wouldn't have laws about what do you do if you live with them. Now, you also then have to have laws between Jews. Okay? Now, financially, what's going to happen is you're going to see there's an idea of tzedakah. But a good question is, why would anyone be poor? I mean, what happened? Have any of you ever seen that picture of the 40 or some families who divided up Tel Aviv? You ever seen this picture? It's just a sand dune in the year 1900 something, 2, 3, 4, 7, I don't know. Tel Aviv was nothing, just a sand dune a little over 100 years ago. And 40 families got together, and they drew lots to decide who was going to get what plot. There's a very famous picture of it. You can Google it later. It's amazing. Well, that's what happened when the Jewish people came into the land of Israel. Joshua drew lots. And he put on the names of the family. So he put, the Finkelsteins and the Schwartzes. And he threw the lots. He said, okay, your family, you get this piece of land. Now, what's a lot? In Hebrew, the word is goral. Now, goral means a lot that you would throw. I know what you're thinking. What about Purim? Well, Purim's not Hebrew, right? Purim's more that was Haman's word, right? It's more Aramaic. But in Hebrew, it's goral. Goral means a lot that you would throw, but it also is the Hebrew word for fate. You see a connection? And so the idea is that when you throw a lot, and it happens throughout the Tanakh, various occasions, people throw lots, that you're letting God decide. I'm throwing these lots that says the Finkelstein family. And, if it was a little windier, they would have got a place in Haifa instead of Tel Aviv. But they didn't make that one extra turn, so they ended up with something really valuable in Tel Aviv. And the Schwartzes, got, Janine. So they're hating life. Or, they got Shechem. But the idea is that each one of us descends from a family that has a place that was designed specifically for your family somewhere in the land of Israel. Right? And it says in the Talmud, actually it's in the Tosfot, the commentary to the Talmud, that every Jew has 4 amot in the land of Israel. That there's 4 amot are this big. But this big of piece of land connects to your soul. And so sometimes you have people that say, I never got Israel. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And then they walk, and they hit their spot. And all of a sudden, oh, wow, now I get it. You see, it usually happens to one person per trip. Yeah. Okay, so everyone was supposed to have their own land, but they were all of the same value. Gesundheit. So the guy who's on, the beach in Tel Aviv, whatever that land is, they're all the same size, same value. So why? And when they left Egypt, they divided up the money. Everyone got the same amount of money. So it depends how you use it. Imagine, we could solve poverty in America for good for about 10 minutes. Just give everyone in the country $1 million. It would only cost us $300 million. It's nothing for the government. It's like a penny. Poverty would be back in 5 minutes, right? Because you buy, 4 Rolls Royces and you're done, right? We see this sometimes. People come into new money and they lose it all. So that's not a solution, right? This is what happened. Everyone got their money and their piece of land. But as time went on, the Torah predicts some people are going to lose their money. Some people are going to end up selling part of their home. And now you run into some other laws because technically you're not allowed to sell your home. Your land is your land. My land for my family is my land. I'm not allowed to sell it. There's only one condition I'm allowed to sell it. And that is I have no food to eat. I'm to the point where I can't think about anything else because I'm so poor. This is the definition of oniyut. I'm so poor that I can't think of anything else other than what my next meal is going to be. Only when you reach that point are you allowed to sell your land. Now, let's say someone comes up and says, you know what, I got an idea. I'm going to find all the poor people and I'm going to buy all their land. And now I'm going to own all the land. Well, that's why you have the Yovel. So in 50 years, what happens? It reverts back to the original owner to try to get away from that. It doesn't work so well anymore. Oh, okay. Given all of that, there are a few verses I want to look at that talk about what happens when a Jew, we're only talking about Jew-Jew relation here. All right. What happens when one Jew becomes so poor that he has to sell his home? The Torah predicts this. By the way, we're not in Israel yet, but the Torah already predicts that some people are going to mismanage their money, right? Or come upon hard luck or whatever. All right, so let's get into it. Norman, we're up to chapter 25 of Leviticus, beginning with verse 17.
Do not wrong one another, but fear your God, for I, the Eternal, am your God. You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon the land in security. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year, if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield the crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until the crops come in. For the land is mine. You are the strangers resident with me. Throughout the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land. If one of your kin is in straits and has to sell part of a holding, the nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what the relative has sold. If a person has no one to be a redeemer but prospers and acquires enough to redeem with, the year since its sale shall be computed and the difference shall be refunded to the person to whom it was sold, so that the person returns to that holding. If that person lacks sufficient means to recover it, what was sold shall remain with the purchaser until the Jubilee. In the Jubilee year, it shall be released, so that the person returns to that holding.
Okay, so every 7th year is what's called Shemitah. This year in Israel, Shemitah. In Israel, as you're driving, from the airport to Tel Aviv or to Jerusalem, you pass a lot of farms, and there's big signs up that says Kan Shomrim Shemitah. Here we're observing Shemitah, which is pretty amazing. If you've never been to Israel, and you fly in, and you get on the bus, and you start driving to, either Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and you see these signs, Kan Shomrim Shemitah, you see the Torah come alive right in front of you, which is really incredible, because you don't have these rules, these agricultural rules, you don't do them outside the land of Israel. So, if you have a tree, you're not supposed to eat the fruit of it for 3 years in Israel. In Pinecrest, you can eat it day one. You don't have to wait. There's no rules from that. That's why it says in the Torah, in the 8th year, you're not going to eat the fruit, because that first year after it goes off for a whole year, it doesn't taste very good. So in the 6th year, you're going to get enough food for the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year, and then by the 9th year, which is the 2nd year of it growing in again, you'll start to eat it again. This is miraculous. This doesn't happen today. Now Shemitah, but if you look at last year in Israel, there wasn't enough fruit that grew for 3 years. So if you need other fruit, you have to either import it or get it from non-Jewish land, meaning Palestinian farms. So one time when I was living in Charlotte, I had a dinner, and it was at the home of the conservative rabbi, and he invited a few of us, and the Chabad rabbi was there, and he had these pomelos. There was, pomelos type of fruit from Israel that he ordered. There was some sort of fundraiser, pomelos for peace or something. So he had these pomelos. So he offered them to everyone. And I didn't take one because I don't really care for fruit. The Chabad rabbi says, well, are these farmed by Jews or Palestinians? So the conservative rabbi is proud of his Zionism. Of course, by Jews. The Chabad rabbi says, in that case, no thank you. Because they're not, they're not, for Shemitah. So they might have been farmed in a year when they weren't supposed to be farmed. So, because not everybody necessarily goes according to the law. But if the land's owned and farmed by Palestinians, then they're not subjected to that rule, and you can eat the fruit, which is interesting. It's funny. I actually I had a meeting with a guy who does food tours when I was in Israel 2 trips ago, so like 6 weeks ago, he was teaching me about desserts, and he said, the majority of the halva that's made in Israel comes from ingredients from Nablus. The Nablus is known for their whatever the ingredients are. That's where the desserts are. And in Nablus, they package it all in Hebrew. And he was showing me, he says, look at this. It looks, this could have been packaged by the rabbinate. And it was packaged in, and it's kosher because they have it certified. But it's made by Palestinians. There's a lot of interesting. If food was diplomacy, we could probably do better. Okay. So what I want to focus on is the case where your brother becomes impoverished. So if you look at verse 25, now there's a Hebrew word yamuch. Yamuch is actually has a very ancient root. It has roots in Akkadian and Aramaic, and it means to in these other languages, the other ancient languages, Akkadian. I looked it up. Akkadian and Aramaic. It refers to descending at a rapid rate to a really, really low point. So when we, this isn't that, your stocks went down a point or two. This is you've lost it all. Okay? So, verse 25, Ki yamuch achicha. The fact that it says achicha, ach, the Hebrew word for brother, means Jew. Okay, so if your brother becomes impoverished and sells his ancestral heritage, his redeemer who is closest to him shall come and redeem his brother's sale. So, if your parents are alive, they need to come and redeem you. If the parents aren't around, but your brother or sister's family are around, then they need to come. If they're not around, then your kids need to come. If they're not around, your cousin, your uncle, your whoever, and so on and so forth, until they realize you have no family left at all. Right? Okay, so they have to see that you're in trouble, and they have to come and help you. Now, what does that mean? You look at Rashi, the first source on the page. And if thy brother be waxen poor and has sold away some of his possession, the introductory words teach us that one is not permitted to sell his real estate except under the pressure of poverty. So we mentioned this already, but the idea of having your ancestral heritage means that that's yours, and it's already been divinely decided. You can't trade. So I just want to point this out. The house that you get, that's it. You're there. Now, so there's a teaching in the Talmud that you would hate. This is why you need to be reformed. You would hate this so much. If I almost don't want to tell you because you're going to hate it so much. You want to hear it? Yeah. You're going to despise it. You're going to be mad at me for telling you this. So it says in the Talmud, there used to be people. This is going to drive you crazy. I've never even told this to congregants before. I get a kick out of it every time I read it. So everyone has their home. And you're here, so you got the north, and your family got the south. And it says sometimes the weather is going to get bad. And you're going to think, I'd like to have a house for that time of year somewhere else too.
In the Berkshires.
You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. Now, the good news is, it's only for the land of Israel. It's only for the land of Israel. So you can, in the States, you can have a home in every state. But in the land of Israel, you're not allowed to be a snowbird. You're stuck where you are. You're like a Chabad rabbi. Once you get sent there, that's how it works. They send you to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or North Dakota, wherever it is. You're there. That's it. The Rebbe decided, even before you were going to be there, you're there. There's no movement. They never move. Wherever you go, you go. We don't do it that way in Reform. Okay, so my point is that there's something divine about every Jewish family's land that they get. Okay, now, Rashi comments on two other phrases in that same verse. Some of his possession. Now, let's say you have, your possession is, 200 meters, whatever, square meters, and you need to sell it. You can't sell it all. Look what it says. But not the entire property. Scripture thereby teaches you a practical rule that however needy a man is, he should always leave some of his immovables, literally his field, for himself. So even if you only keep your field and you build a hut or something out back, you can't sell the whole thing. Nobody's that poor that you can't get some money from part of your land to help you start rebuilding. Interesting idea. Now, that's in a case where your brother, or your cousin, or your father, or whoever doesn't come and bail you out. But in that case, you're only allowed to sell part of it, which is an interesting idea. Can you imagine that today? I guess some people rent out a room, right? Need to make some extra money. We have a basement, right? It could be yours, right? Just don't make any noise after like 4 p.m. Okay. Now, he shall redeem that which his brother sold. Now, this is one of the most interesting things. Consider this. This is actual legislation. So I'm out of money. I sell my house to somebody else. My brother finds out about it, comes down from the Golan, bails me out, says to the guy that I sold the house for, I'm here to buy the house back. And that guy might say,
I don't want to sell it back. I like it. I'm going to rent it out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put on an addition. I'm going to build like a workout room or something. Now I'm going to work for home. Whatever. He has to sell it back. That's the law. You have to sell it back. When the family member gets there, or anyone who's willing to redeem it for the original owner, you're required to sell it back.
Is there a time limit?
I don't know. I would imagine it's whenever someone comes and asks to buy it. Now remember, there's courts. So, if you don't like the answer that you get, if the guy says, I'm not going to sell back to you, take him to court.
But do you have to sell it at the same price? Like the same
It's a good question. I would imagine so. I would imagine that it had a fair market value, like on Zillow, and you. Yeah, no. I mean, that was the goal, was that nobody should ever do that, and that's why they said that in the Yovel, it all is going to revert back anyway. So the most you could have is 50 years of that land, and then you have to give it back anyway for free.
Is that a rolling 50 years? Each transaction's 50 years?
No, it's for everybody.
Everybody.
Right, it's every
So
50 years.
If you buy something in the 40th year, you've got 10 years.
Exactly. If you could have one day if you buy in the 49th year, and by the way, when do you start? When does the year elapse? Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, they blow the shofar and everything reverts back.
So Rabbi 25:27 says, "You shall compute the years since the sale and refund the difference to the man."
Oh, okay, yeah.
This is all agricultural land, so that's essentially.
There's a formula.
There's a formula. It's based on harvest, and 3 or 4 years is 3 or 4 years harvests.
Right. So there's a formula, which I would imagine the court would help enforce. Joe?
What about this impoverished person? And they say they have a really great credit score, and they borrow money to bail themselves out.
Not from the court. Not from the court. The court would tell you your only option is to be a servant to someone and work it off. But could you borrow from a friend? Sure. I mean, however you could get the money, sure.
There are also, having studied it as a banker, there are also all kinds of rules about Jews lending to Jews, not at interest.
Right.
And there are ways to work around it, and the banks, and the Jewish-owned banks in Israel have all, as do Arab banks, have all kinds of ways to sell your property and be able to buy it back at something that looks sort of like interest, but it clearly isn't interest.
Interesting. I don't know much about that. It's really amazing how, in modern Israel they tried to incorporate some of Jewish law. Let's skip a little bit to verse 35. And you'll notice, now why do I want to skip to there? Because if you can look at the Hebrew, even if you can't understand the Hebrew, I just want to point out that the Hebrew begins in verse 35 the way it begins in verse 25 with these same 3 words, V'chi yamuch achicha. Right, everyone see that? Which means, again, if your brother becomes impoverished. So now we have another phrase that begins that way, and here's what it says now. As John pointed out, some of the interim verses talk about the formula and what happens and where you live and how you deal with the impoverished person. But now it comes again and says this. If your brother becomes impoverished and his hand falters in your proximity, you shall hold on to him, proselyte and resident, so that he can live with you. Okay? In other words, you have to relieve him, and even if you have a relative who is a proselyte, you still have to help him get his land back. Now, you might say, well, why do I have to do that? If he converted to Judaism, he wasn't considered. When Joshua threw the lots, nobody knew about this guy because he didn't exist as a Jew. And so his land isn't divinely given to him because he wasn't part of the lot system. The answer is yes, he was. How did Joshua know? Because God told him that there's going to be converts And those converts have this is a very profound thing that the Torah is saying here. When someone converts, the land of Israel belongs to them just like any Jew. And they have an ancestral homeland in it, even if they weren't Jewish at the time, or their family line wasn't Jewish at the time when Joshua threw the lots, which is a really interesting idea. Now, but to help make this verse make sense, you have to look at Rashi. Edith, would you mind reading or Judy, thou shalt relieve him?
Thou shalt relieve him. Do not leave him by himself so that he comes down in the world until he finally falls altogether, when it would be difficult for him to give him a lift, but uphold him from the very moment of the failure of his means.
Okay, so what does that mean? If your brother gets to the point that he's so poor that he's got to sell his house, that's your fault. Where were you on his downward descent? You should have been helping him all along. Now, if he, just one day went to Jericho and put it all on black, and just like that, he lost it all. Okay. But that's not what this means. That's not what used to happen. You would see someone sliding down into poverty. I mean, this was basically like a socialist system. Everyone had the same piece of land, the same amount of money, and that's how it was supposed to be all the time. And someone's now sliding. Why aren't you paying attention to what's going on with your family? You should have been helping him well before he got this low. That's what it's saying so far. Okay. Judy, let's go on. To what may
this, the difference between whether you assist him at once or whether you wait with your help till he has come down in the world, be compared to an excessive load on the back of an ass. So long as it is still on the ass's back, one person is enough to take hold of it, the load, and to keep it, the ass, up. As soon as it has fallen to the ground, not even 5 persons are able to set it on its legs.
Right. So this is one of those times where Rashi says, I don't think you'll understand this. So I'm going to give you like an example. And now you say, oh, wow, if you tell me about the donkey, now I really get it. I don't know if you feel that way. Not everyone has me to explain. All right, whatever. Okay, so now, the second paragraph there, in Hebrew it says ger v'toshav. So let's just point out what some of the terminology. There are different types of people who are at one point not Jewish, living in the land of Israel. There's the non-Jew who says, I still want to worship idols. Okay, well, that person's immoral and you got to get rid of that person. There's the non-Jew who says, I don't want to be Jewish, but I am willing to follow the 7 Noahide laws and give up worshiping idols. That person can live with you, and you're required to take care of that person. So that's called the ger toshav, which translates to resident alien. But it's really, what it means is someone who takes upon him or herself to follow the 7 Noahide laws, but not to fully convert to Judaism. And then ultimately there's the ger. What's the ger? Someone who actually converts and becomes a full Jew. So those are the three different types of people. And the rules, how you relate to them, are all different. Now, one of the things that's interesting is, and we're not going to have time to go through the whole Torah portion, but you see, let's say someone is, well, actually, we are going to get to this a little bit. Let's say you take in your brother, and he lost his land, and he's coming to live with you, and he's going to basically work for you for a year or two, or whatever your arrangement is, and then you'll buy his land back or whatever. So you're not allowed to treat him like a slave. What does that mean? You can't make your brother wash your feet. There's certain things that, because it's your brother, would be demeaning. Now, if you want to make him farm while you're farming, that he's got to be there and farm with you, no problem. But you can't make him wash your feet or clean out your bathhouse. That's demeaning. So a good question is, why are you allowed to do that to your slaves? Can't you wash your own feet? Why are you allowed to demean your slaves? And you're not supposed to demean your slaves. It's just, what it's really saying is, because it's a family relative, you have to show them a little bit more honor. However, Who are these non-Jewish slaves? Why would any non-Jew want to be a slave to a Jew? Who are these people? So, and I had some trouble trying to figure this out, so I looked it up. Because one of the things that we always say is that when the Jewish people in Mishpatim, in Exodus, when they leave Egypt and they start telling, here's the rules of slavery, and they say, you can't treat your slaves the way we were treated, and look how great we are to our slaves, and you have to give them all these benefits, and you can't harm them, and they go free. Okay, so we treat our slaves wonderfully. But then we come to say, well, the Jewish slave you have to treat like this, but a non-Jewish slave you can treat a little bit less, not as well. And so then we have a problem because we're saying, well, wait a minute. I thought we learned about the problems of slavery in Egypt and we're trying to make it better. But so the question is, well, who are these non-Jewish slaves? The non-Jewish slaves were almost always people who were captured in battle. And they were of the most immoral variety of humans. These were killers. These were, really, really bad people. And by bringing them in to be a slave to a Jewish family, the goal was to refine them and teach them morality. And so the way you related to them was maybe a little bit different because they were so wild. And that's who they were. That's the explanation. I mean, I don't think anyone believes any of that, but no, I'm just kidding. But that's the rabbinic explanation, which is really fascinating because you'd have to ask yourself a question. Who are these non-Jews? I mean, they're not living together. They're living in different places. And all of a sudden, there are all these non-Jewish slaves. You have to wonder, well, who are they? And if you read through the Bible and you see that they're always skirmishing and there are always battles, and sometimes it tells you in the Bible that they, if you're reading through the Tanakh, they took this amount of, they killed this many Philistines or this many whatever, and they took this many slaves and so forth, and that's where that comes from. Okay. Now, I just want to look at one more verse in Leviticus, which is 39. Guess how it starts? V'chi yamuchachecha. Okay, there's one more v'chi yamuchachecha. In other words, there are 3 verses in this section of Leviticus, of Bahar, that start with when your brother becomes impoverished. We've looked at 2 so far. Here's the 3rd one. It's verse 39. If your brother becomes impoverished with you and is sold to you, you shall not work with him. You shall not work with him slave labor. Okay, so we're just kind of talking about this, but if you look what Rashi says on this, verse 39, the third source on the front sheet here, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondservant, i.e., thou shalt not make him do degrading work by which he's recognized as a slave. This might come out that he shall not, for instance, carry the master's clothes after him to the public baths, okay, nor help him on with his boots. All right, so I forgot I put this on here. I already explained it, but there you go. Yeah.
Question. Your translation says continue, it says that in 39, or it says continue?
In 39?
Yeah.
My translation says, if your brother becomes impoverished with you and is sold to you, you shall not work with him slave labor.
I'm asking only because in Plau it says continue, and in 35 it says in, and in 25 says is, as if there is some sort of a progression.
Some sort of progression?
Some sort of a progression. In 25 it says if your brother is.
Oh,
In 35 it says being, as in, and then it says, in 39 it says continue.
oh, no, my translation says if your brother becomes impoverished in both verses. Yet another issue with Platt.
Because I assume that the Hebrew one, the Hebrew text, does it make any difference?
No, it's the same thing. V'chi yamuchachecha. V'chi, and when, yamuch, he will become lowered. Achecha, your brother. Ian?
There's something strange here. So this is your brother. The population is controlled and small, and so they're all Jews, and that's how to treat your Jews who had trouble, et cetera, et cetera. Your obligation morally is not let him drown in his poverty or hunger. But they still put slavery in a different, that is really the low people. And we know from history that slaves, like Spartacus, Rome did that. Everyone they conquered, they put in slavery. And ultimately, and this is why we love Spartacus, is he represents mankind fighting against this domination and this horrible situation they put in.
Right, but there's one difference between the Jews, and that is Shemitah and Yovel. Every 7 years, the slave goes free. Why? Because he's been rehabilitated. Now, if he hasn't been fully rehabilitated and the slave himself says, I want to stay here, you pierce his ear and say, you can stay. And so, obviously they did that sometimes. But that's the difference. With the Jews, it was meant to be a system of rehabilitation to get people back on their feet. And in 7 years, which is one, cycle, you're supposed to be able to go out and now support yourself. I was studying this portion with one of my students this week, a high school student. And we got to the verse, talking about Yovel, that says, you shall proclaim freedom throughout the land. In the Yovel year, because in the 50th year of the Yovel year, all slaves go free. So I said to him, do you know where you find this verse in the United States? The Liberty Bell. This is like I said to my wife yesterday. There's a new place called Just Salad. Have you heard of this place, Just Salad? So I said to my wife, I went to Just Salad and got a sandwich. I mean, that's how you should feel when you see this verse on the Liberty Bell. Freedom throughout the land. Well, what's the rest of that verse? That all slaves go free in the 50th year. 1776, all slaves go free. It's the most absurd verse in history. That's the verse they chose. The verse that talks about all slaves going free. Yovel. On the Liberty Bell. From slave owners. I mean, you can't, it's mind-boggling. Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to show you the continuation of Deuteronomy. So if you could skip into Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 4. $14.40, perfect.
I think it's 1440 in the cloud.
Okay. Would you mind reading it, Ken?
Okay.
Chapter 15, verse 4.
Okay. Before I read, I want to mention one thing. Judy asked a question, but she didn't have the speaker to and she was asking, how long does a person have to redeem the land? And I know it's forever, except in a walled city for 1 year. Right?
Yeah, it's explained, like verse 26, 27. Right.
All right. So, okay.
Good question.
There shall be no needy among you, since the Lord your God will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion. If only you heed the Lord your God and take care to keep all the instructions that I enjoin upon you this day.
Okay. Now, did you hear that? There's not going to be anybody poor. What are we worried about this for? There's not going to be any poor people. Torah says that. Okay, so let's look at Rashi first. The last Rashi on the page, on the first page. Howbeit there shall be no needy among you. But further on, we're going to get to verse 11, it states, for the needy shall, let's look at verse 11 first, then we'll go to the Rashis. Would you mind, Ken, reading just 15:11?
For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kinsmen in your land.
Okay, so this makes no sense. Because we spent all this time in Leviticus talking about when someone becomes poor, here's what you're going to do. But then the Torah in chapter 15, verse 4 of Deuteronomy says there's not going to be anybody who's poor. So why do you tell me all this is never going to happen anyway? But then, even after it tells you there's not going to be any needy, the Torah then comes and says, just kidding, it's going to be all the time. It's always going to be that way. Okay.
Oh, Rabbi, there will always be widows and orphans. So are they not the needy, even if...
A widow should never be poor because of the ketubah. As soon as you die, there should be 200 shekels ready to roll.
And what about the orphans?
The orphans, they had like a school. I don't know. Right, no, so, right, I mean, look what, and there's also the ger. I mean, when you look in the Torah, 36 times it says, look out for the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. Right? Okay. And for the widow, I think it really means, try to like set them up with your friends because, I don't think it's so much financial because they all had their ketubas. All right. So here's what Rashi says on verse 4. But further on in verse 11, it states, for the needy shall never cease out of the land. But the explanation is, when you do the will of the omnipresent, the needy will be amongst the others and not amongst you. If, however, you do not do the will of the omnipresent, the needy will be amongst you, which means to say, yeah, there are going to be people who lose their estate. There are going to be people who are impoverished. But within a moment, their brother's going to show up and say, no problem, I got you. And so as long as you follow the mitzvahs, what's the mitzvah? That you've got to go and redeem your kinsperson. As long as everyone's following my mitzvahs and is afraid of me and is worried about what I tell you to do, I've built in a solution to homelessness. By the way, I've also built in solutions for hunger. Remember the corners of your field? You're hungry, you have no food, there's nowhere to get food. Go to anyone's field and eat whatever you want. Because they've left the corners of the field with plenty of food for you. So in a Torah-based system, there's no hunger, there's no homelessness. Which is pretty incredible. So that's how it should be. That's how it should be. I've built in mechanisms to defeat homelessness and poverty. However, the Torah then comes and says, but you're Jews. And you don't always do what I tell you. And because of that, verse 11, the needy will always be there. And so Rashi comes on verse 11. And he says, thou shalt surely open thine hand unto the brother, to thy poor. Open thine hand to the brother. To which brother? To the poor one. Now, I want to conclude, I had a couple other sources, but I only had them in Hebrew, and I figured I could just explain them as opposed to translating the whole thing. So there was a rabbi, you've probably heard, or maybe you've heard of a rabbi named Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who was a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidic Judaism. He lived like in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He's buried in Ukraine, and people make pilgrimages to his grave, what's called the Bratslaver Hasidim. His big thing was be happy. Mitzvah gedola liot besimcha. It's a big mitzvah to be happy. Right? So he had a student named Rav Natan. And Rav Natan basically wrote all of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught it, and then other people, his disciples, later wrote it down. And Rav Natan wrote this book called Likutei HaMaharan, which is the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. And one of the things that he was explaining from the school of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav based on this idea is when you're poor and when you're struggling, it's very hard to think of anything else. And so you're not going to necessarily be able or have the luxury to study Torah, to sit and think about philosophical ideas, to have a successful business, to volunteer, to do things for other people, to write a book, to compose poetry, to produce really anything, because you are so beaten down by poverty and so focused on what your next meal is going to be and how you're going to get through the day that takes up all your energy. And if you've ever been really sick, I was feeling this way last week. It was just a kidney stone, but it was debilitating. And so, you know, I'm thinking there's so many things I want to do. And right now, you know, going to the restroom is a major accomplishment. You know, so it's a little gross. But, I mean, I can't think beyond that. And so, given that idea, I just want to share one more idea and then make a final point. A few weeks ago when I was in Poland, I was asked to speak at the opening night in Krakow. And so I looked at the Eish Kodesh. The Eish Kodesh were the writings of Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, who was a rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto, whose writings were found, he buried his writings. And he used to give sermons, Devar Torahs, in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was one of the leading rabbis of the Warsaw Ghetto. Ultimately, he was murdered by the Nazis. But in the 60s, they found his writings. And they put them into a book. And they're arranged by Torah portion. And so I went to the Torah portion of the week that we were in Krakow. And saw what he had to say about it. And I used that as the basis for my comments in Krakow. And so I said, one of the things that he said at that moment, the Torah portion was Shmini. He said, when you are being beaten down, I mean, he's talking to people in the Warsaw Ghetto. When you're being beaten down, all you can think about is your own pain. And, you know, it's natural when you're in pain to focus on yourself. And this is one of the biggest crimes of the Nazis, is they've taken away our ability to care for each other because we're so focused on ourselves. And so we need to have pity, not just on what we're going through, and he was inspiring them to care for each other, which is amazing. But his point was, when you're beaten down, there's little beyond yourself that you can do. And it's the same way for what Rav Natan was saying about the poor person in this week's Torah portion, is that when you're poor, there's not much else you can focus on. So I think sometimes, especially, you know, this is a highly intellectual group. And this is a very advanced group, and I mean, the amount of education in this room is very high. And people like us who think about things, you might look at someone else who's uncultured and maybe look down on them. You might, you know, think of people who aren't accomplishing great things and think that they're not great people, right? And, you know, so if I ask someone, well, what's a great person? So you'd say Elie Wiesel, Martin Luther King. Yeah, great people. They've done extraordinary things. But the woman, I can tell you, like when my wife had a hip replacement, so like I'm in charge of the kids. So to be in charge of the kids and have a job is impossible. It can't be done. I mean, right? Like, I mean, it can't be done, right? So, you know, she just took 4 shots of morphine, and I'm like, wait, how do you wash socks again? Yeah, I mean, my son's got a game, his uniform's dirty. There's a major cataclysmic event. I mean, we don't know what we're gonna do. I'm like, shh, snap out of it, you know. Where's the detergent? So, you know, these things can't be done to be a father and a parent at the same time without a mother. So you have these women who are working 3 jobs, 2 kids, no husband, no money, but they don't really understand Nietzsche, you know, and they don't have an advanced degree. And so you say, this isn't a great person. And I think what the Torah is trying to tell us is, you have to judge every person by where they're at. And not everybody at the end of the day. You know, as Jews, the main goal in Judaism before you die is to learn as much Torah. And to have spent as much time as you can. So, but at the end of the day, there are going to be plenty of Jews in line who say, you know, I really didn't learn much Torah. And you laugh at them and say, That's pathetic. I once made a terrible joke to my, I just give you one example. This was many years ago. And my wife was talking to one of her friends from college. And it was July 4th or something. And we were getting ready to go to the fireworks. And I said, they lived in Ohio. I said, ask her if they're going to the fireworks. Where they're going. I don't know why I cared, but I said, ask. So Joey said, they're not going. Her husband can't make it. I said, why not? Where's their civic duty? Yeah, I was making a joke. I do that. And she looked at me like she was ready to kill me. She's like, they could have overheard you. I'm like, so what? It's a firework. Yeah. I said, what about civic duty? He's a military doctor in the reserves, that's where he was. That's why he's not going. And I'm his civic duty. So, you have to judge people according to where they are. And so if you get to the end of the line and say, this guy didn't study as much Torah, you're not going to laugh at him and say, psh, you don't know that much Torah. You never know where someone's at. And the truth is that you might look at someone and say, that person has perfectly good time to study Torah, to do mitzvahs, to volunteer, and he doesn't do anything except play golf or whatever. You might say that, but what you don't know is what's really going on with these people. I'll end with a joke. So you may have heard this joke. It's an old joke, but it's kind of a funny one. In Beverly Hills, the Federation director knew of this Jewish movie producer, wildly successful, unlimited money, never gave any money to Federation. And the president of the Federation said to the director, we need to go solicit this guy. He said, okay, he's never given us anything, but it's worth a shot. So they show up at his home, and this incredibly wealthy guy, and he's got, 4 Rolls Royces out front, welcomes him in his home. He comes in, and he says to them, you think you guys come to my house, you think you know me. You don't know that my daughter is in a special school in Switzerland. You don't know that that my parents don't make a living. You don't know that I have a brother who's mentally ill and his kids don't do anything. And if I don't give any of them a penny, what makes you think I'm going to give anything to you? So it's an old one, but it's a very old one. But the final point, I think, is that what the Torah is trying to tell us is you have to judge people where they are. And if you go around life saying, this person isn't as accomplished as me, and this person isn't a great person because he's not, Golda Meir or something, or David Ben-Gurion, then they're not, doing anything for the Jewish people. That's the wrong way to go about it, because you never know what kind of obstacles a person is dealing with. And so what you're supposed to do is try to find out where they are and help them wherever they are deal with the situation that they're in. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
The corollary